you all of my life.
We are now at the conclusion of today's episode, which is going to be public transit themed. Big news from earlier last week was Governor Gretchen Whitmer proposing a $3 billion, and then that's billion with a B, long-term road funding plan. But details still coming out, and of course, all subjected to negotiations between Whitmer and the Republican House Speaker in Michigan, Matt Hall, if they want a chance at survival in Lansing. But based on what we know so far, is that Whitmer has revealed her developing desires to generate $1.6 billion with a B again, linked to new unspecified taxes on large corporations, $470 million from a new wholesale tax on marijuana, and to revamp Michigan's taxation practices to ensure all tax dollars paid at the fuel pump go toward the state's roads and transportation infrastructure, while facing the obstacle that a portion of that pump money right now is significantly dedicated to the school aid fund. One of the groups to welcome this early phase of Whitmer's vision was the Michigan Public Transit Association, or the MPTA for short, representing more than 60 transit providers in the state from buses to ferry services. Together, they estimate that in order to fully fund bus support in Michigan, an additional $200 million in yearly funding would be needed. To begin our conversations on the unraveling road funding debate right now, our MPTA representatives. We are joined by John Dulmes, the executive director of the Michigan Public Transit Association, which is a role he's been in since July of last year. Hello, John. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Sam.
No, thank you so much for coming on. Additionally, we are joined by Jamie Forbes, the Director of External Affairs at the Saginaw Transit Authority Regional Services. Jamie has been with the Saginaw-based Transit Authority, or STARS, since 2018, and for 2 years, from fall 2018 through October 2020, she was a Saginaw City Council member. Hello, Jamie. Thanks for coming on as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, well, again, just to reiterate, I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to come on the MIRS Monday podcast, especially with road and transportation funding being such a hot topic. Obviously, you two have been signaling the alarm that if Michigan wants effective public transit services, extra money and resources are needed. To begin our interview, can one of you just walk me through the day in the life of a transit authority? And what are some of the present day obstacles or lack of resources one is navigating through on a daily basis?
Yeah, we offer a variety of services, everything from bus routes. We offer 10 bus routes here in Saginaw. We also offer curb-to-curb service called paratransit that gets seniors and disabled folks to their destinations. We also have a program called Rides to Wellness, which does non-emergency medical and related programming that's countywide and regional. And we also have a lot of specialized routes that came from public-private partnerships, like jobs-related transportation, education, things like that. And so we are busy all the time getting people to where they need to go, connecting them to opportunities like education, like healthcare, like mental health care, and jobs. Of course, we are a big economic driver as well. And so we have all these wonderful programs in the state of Michigan, but we need to make sure that everyone has the accessibility to get to them and to utilize them and to make their lives better because of it.
Jamie, when you think about who's kind of I would dare say, who's like your little guy in this fight? When you think about the work that you're doing and now this advocacy that you're pursuing, who are some of the people that are using your authority that you're thinking most about?
Yeah, so we are thinking most about people who want to go get jobs and be able to support themselves. We're thinking about people who need to access essential medical care. For example, we recently, due to some of the challenges that we're facing at the state level, we had to cut our 5 a.m. departure. And a lot of people that are getting up that early, most of them are going to jobs. And they're really impacted by that service cut. This is about people being able to support themselves and to be self-sufficient. And when these kind of services are changed, it really impacts their ability to live life the way that we all take for granted that our cars allow us to do. We're really thinking about a person who is starting out. We look at a lot of young people. They're not getting licenses at age 16 like I did. They're not getting cars. Maybe if they are getting cars, they're not in reliable cars. We see that a lot with adults as well. And so we just want to make sure that people are able to access those important things and that transportation is not a constant worry for them, that they can count on us to get where they need to go. I think this is really something that is easy to forget when we have a car outside in our driveway, but there are so many households in Saginaw County and across the state where they have no access to any vehicles whatsoever. And we need to make sure that they can still do all the important life things that we all get to do.
John, I want to ask you, I mean, I know that Jamie just mentioned having to cut that 5 a.m. service. Can you just kind of tell me a bit about some of the cuts you've recently been hearing about across the different transit authorities you represent?
Yeah, it's a great question. We agree that Michigan has a roads problem. We all see the potholes and the crumbling bridges, and our vehicles travel those same roads as well. And so we agree that there needs to be some investment in our roads. But we also know that there's a local bus funding crisis. And what this looks like may be somewhat different, whether it's a rural part of the state or an urban part of the state. But this looks like a reduced service days where rides are only available on weekdays and not on the weekends, or limited hours, as Jamie mentioned, which really makes it hard for shift workers. This looks like decreased service frequency, like a bus that might only come every 30 to 45 minutes, or one that you might need to reserve a week in advance, which makes it very difficult for many people to use. It might look like service that's not reliable enough. When the buses are under maintenance or when there's a lack of drivers, the buses are late. And so people miss their work, they miss their appointment, and they might just avoid going places. It looks like reduced service routes where the buses can't serve more remote areas, where there be a residence or a workplace or a retailer that's in that area that cannot be served anymore. And it looks like prioritized rides where transit providers, especially in rural areas, have to prioritize people going to dialysis or a medical appointment, but may not be able to give a ride to someone going to the store or to visit family or maybe even to their work. And so these problems are occurring all over the state of Michigan. Transit providers have been forced to cut or not hire and fill positions, and they're not able to receive training and certification. And this is really hurting communities now, and we're definitely worried about the near term and long term.
Do you ever feel, I know sometimes when we have transit conversations in Michigan, there's a lot of chit chat about, oh my gosh, I wish Michigan had more high-speed rail. I wish we had more trains. I wish we had more everyday commuter rail. I'm a little bit curious. Do you think people get so lost in the conversations of wishful subway thinking that they forget about the bus routes that we currently have?
I think Michigan, we know that we never built the systems that many other cities had, and there's some urban visions out there and plans that people would like to see. And some of that is worth exploring. But we know that the price tag on some of those projects would be in the B with the billions. And even though there are areas of our country, including Columbus, Ohio, where the voters there recently approved $8 billion in funding over the next couple decades to build out some of those kind of things, in Michigan, our gap is in the hundreds of millions. So yes, it's not quite as big of a price tag, but it is acute with the bus systems we already have that are already serving most of the state. And those are buses of different sizes, whether it be a big bus in a city like Saginaw or Lansing, or a smaller van or a bus that's providing service all around rural Michigan every day.
John, I would love to ask you a legislative question. Last year, there was a lot of fiery talk around Lansing about reforming our corporate incentive program to set aside multi-million-dollar funding pots for transformative transit projects. What was it like to witness those conversations and to see them die so quietly amid lame duck 2024?
Yeah, we definitely were encouraged last year by two things. And the first was the establishment of the Legislative Transit Caucus, which was bipartisan and bicameral and was the first of its type in our legislature that really brought together people interested in moving this forward, again, from urban and rural areas of our state. And one of the things that came out of that and one of the developments was the SOAR package in the House, which would have included $200 million a year for public transit projects, which was pretty groundbreaking and represented a shift in how we might fund or emphasize our economic development. And we really appreciated that. But as you know, that plan didn't move forward due to many of the moving pieces and some of the challenges during lame duck. And so it seems now we're back to talking about a road funding plan, perhaps, that is somewhat melded with economic development. And we're very eager for the conversation because we know that public transit is economic development. In Saginaw, in other communities where economic development projects are planned, and they're talking about giving grants to companies or to build public infrastructure, transit providers are actually at the table and are regularly called into those conversations to help ensure that these new jobs and these new workers are able to make it to those projects. And we've seen that happen in an innovative way in some areas like CATA and Lansing, which is giving rides to some of the new plants that are opening up. But we also hope to see on a long-term basis that the funding can reflect some of those opportunities.
What do those partnerships look like currently? If there's a new business, a new big plant that just opened in your community, and they say, "Oh, how about we have a bus route that goes here?" How do those partnerships typically unfold?
So we have some great public-private partnerships here in Saginaw with employers, and we transport folks 2 and 3 shifts a day, up to 7 days a week to their jobs. It really allows our citizens to be able to even consider the idea of being able to take these great paying jobs with good benefits. For example, we have a relationship with Hemlock Semiconductor, which has been really important to this area. Producing silicon within the country is a big priority nationally, and we can do our part to make sure that they get the employees that they need to be able to hit their targets. So 2 shifts a day, we transport out to Hemlock, bringing them employees that they so desperately need. We also have relationships with a couple of employers out in Pigeon, which is a long trek. It's over an hour, and that's really important for them to be able to hit their targets as well. These kind of conversations start out. I'm really thankful that we've been included kind of early in the process for a couple of up and coming employers to be able to talk about serving their needs, both in the transition of the creation of the business, and then once they get on regular schedules. And to be included in those conversations, we look here in Saginaw at a potential medical diamond, which would bring a lot more healthcare organizations to Saginaw. And to be included in those conversations early is really important to us. I think that you'll find across the state that public transits stand ready to support all of these important economic development projects.
John, Jamie, either of you could answer this. I mean, what's the most you've seen an employer willing to pay for one of these partnerships?
They're really subsidizing our work. We serve the folks in the city of Saginaw, so it is within our mission, absolutely, to make sure that those folks have access to jobs. In terms of the details, I think that really comes down to a case-by-case basis, but I think that we can say comfortably that having the right workforce is absolutely imperative to the success of these expansion projects and these new builds as well.
I would add that most of the universities and the major campuses in our state partner with their local public transit providers, and they're already providing those services for education. They're doing it for medical. They're doing it for after-school programs for K through 12 students, because there are definitely limitations on the school transportation side too. And so public transit has been pretty flexible in how they provide those services.
Our Rise to Wellness fleet. So these are folks taking people to medical appointments, but also to all kinds of things. We don't have rules about what the purpose of the rides are. A one-way trip anywhere within Saginaw County, flat rate here at STARS is $20, which is, I think, very comparable to what folks would be paying in the private market, and is also super flexible. And we have a lot of partnerships with different stakeholders that provide medical, mental health care, all kinds of programming to folks. So that kind of gives you a general idea of how much that kind of travel costs. In terms of employers, of course, it's different, but it does just sort of depend on a case-by-case basis.
So, John, could you just kind of tell me a little bit about what your organization is advocating for with lawmakers this year, especially as we dive deeper and deeper into budget making and road funding debate season?
Yeah, our main priority is just to ensure that any conversation around road funding actually considers the comprehensive transportation modes. And as a general rule of thumb, Michigan's transportation funding has set aside 10%, a relatively small amount that's gone to local bus systems predominantly, but also ferries and aviation and ports and rail and intercity buses like the Michigan Flyer. So as we look at the plans out there, we appreciate both Governor Whitmer and Speaker Hall putting forward their plans for about $3 billion in transportation funding. I always say that there should be 3 questions about these road funding plans. First of all is how many dollars? Second is where are the dollars coming from? And third is where are the dollars going to? So it seems right now that there's some sort of consensus on the first question of how many dollars, about $3 billion. There doesn't seem to be any consensus at all on where the dollars should come from, as you mentioned. And there's probably still some different opinions about exactly where the dollars are going to. And so we're trying to educate lawmakers on how transit is funded, what the needs are, As we mentioned, we estimate about $200 million a year. And the plans put forward by both Speaker Hall and Governor Whitmer would get us a pretty substantial amount of the way to fully funding the local systems we have. And going beyond that would require some additional creativity or additional funding to get into that more dream type territory or some larger goals.
How much money does like an authority like yours, Jamie, how much do you all usually expect from the state on an annual basis?
Around $3 million, which it's about the cut that we received from last year to this year is about a 4 to 5% of our total budget, but it symbolizes a 19% cut in that LBO and that state funding. So this is a major blow to our budget. $444,000 a year, which if you were to figure out what that equates to in our kinds of service, that's 5,406 revenue hours. We average about 4.7 passengers per hour. So that equals out to over 25,000 rides that we may not be able to give due to this loss of funding. It also, that number is right around the total amount that we pay for all of the salaries of our Lyft drivers. So those are folks taking seniors and disabled folks to medical appointments, to job opportunities, things like that. And so these kind of cuts impact us in a big way, and it results in loss of services that hurts our people. And so we sure hope that our elected officials will be thinking about those important rides when they determine our budget for this upcoming year.
It was. Did you say it was like a 4% cut?
Yep, it's between 4 and 5% of our total budget was lost from the state funding cut from last year to this year. It equates to 19% of our LBO cut from last year to this year. So it's a big chunk of change, and it impacts us on a day-to-day basis.
One important thing I want to mention is that public transit has been routinely supported by local voters. And we've seen across the state, whether it's in urban areas or rural areas, red areas or blue areas, all throughout the years, that local millages that support public transit have passed at more than a 90% rate. And we saw some very strong votes of support of significant transit funding measures, even as recently as last November. So now we think it's time for the governor and legislature to do their part at the state level and put forward some plans that make sure that the state is meeting its responsibilities.
Could you tell me a little bit more about what is the price tag and some of the things that you've encountered with making sure that there are drivers to drive these buses?
We take training very seriously here at STARS. We have an on-site CDL training program, which has been a total game changer for us. We've been able to put dozens of people through this program, and they've all passed their test and been able to join our workforce. You know, CDL is a high requirement, and we have some other passenger endorsement and air brakes to be able to drive these giant vehicles. We have 35-foot buses, and it takes a real professional to be able to safely navigate the community in one of these giant vehicles. We have a great workforce of professional drivers that get our folks where they need to go. And unfortunately, one of the byproducts of that can be that although we offer a great training program, it also makes our staff very desirable in other industries as well. And so we do, in a way, serve as a training for lots of different industries of folks that end up switching from public transit to some other kind of trucking in the future. And that's also why it's really important for us to be able to pay well, to be able to keep our folks that train with us. And when we are forced to pay so much less than other industries because of our lack of funding, it makes it really difficult for us to be able to keep the folks under our roof after we train them.
Totally fine if you don't have an exact number of this, but how big of an issue is that someone gets a CDL through your program, and then as soon as they're done with the training program, they're like, oh, I'm going to go do something for the private sector. How often can you say that occurs, even within the last year?
I don't have a number off the top of my head. I will tell you that we end up doing okay here in Saginaw, but that's also because we have an advantage of being able to make sure that these folks can be home with their families at night, which is not always the case with CDL driving. But it does cost a lot for us to train someone. And so losing those funds is substantial. We do have some methods in place to try to keep people longer, but of course we can't tie their hands. If they want to switch into a different industry, then we certainly support them in that too. But it does end up being a big chunk of change to be able to make sure that we're getting folks trained up at the level that we want. So when we lose them, it really does pinch. Our total package for a driver is around $60,000 a year with pay and benefits. And so if you figure that out, it ends up being pretty substantial. We do a lot of training ongoing as well, which is a big investment. But we know that this is the best way for us to make sure that our riders and our drivers and our community are as safe as possible. The 60 is our lowest level driver. If they're at a CDL level, they're making a little bit more than that.
Everybody, that is Jamie Forbes, the Director of External Affairs at the Saginaw Transit Authority Regional Services, or STARS, as well as John Dulmes, the Executive Director of the Michigan Public Transit Association. John and Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join me on the MIRS Monday podcast to just talk about some of your goals for 2025.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam.